right. Hi, everybody. I am here with the beautiful Ulyn Georgette. Now, Ulyn was born and raised in Trinidad, so she'll tell you a little bit about that in a second. Now, Ulyn and I met when I was in Ottawa at OCR Academy. That's just where it's like a kids gym. So my son was there, her kids was there, and that's how we met. That's how we connected, and we just moved forward from there. We stayed in contact,
Mhm.
and she told me all about her beautiful story, and I really hope it will inspire you guys today. So, Yulin, tell me a little bit more about, you growing up in Trinidad.
Yes. So, hi everyone. It's lovely to be here today. Um, Growing up in Trinidad, I was raised as an only child, raised by a single parent. And I have to say, first of all, I should say that I am sharing my past, looking at it in retrospect, because I very recently discovered that I am an autistic. So, my childhood, now when I look back at it, it's very interesting. um, it was my parents separated when I was very, very young. So, I grew up more with my mom's family than with my dad's. Um, and It was a very unique childhood because I was very close to my grandparents. I spent a lot of time growing up with them. Um, but I, you know, grew up in the church. My grandfather was a minister, and my grandmother was a woman who sang from the time she woke up till the time she went to bed, pretty much. And I always tell people that my grandmother was the original A track because, where you could play that song on repeat over and over
Yep.
and over. I tend to do that. My friends always call me up because I would listen to a song over and over and over because my grandma was one who would have a worship song in her heart and she could just sing that for hours. And it's interesting. Later in life, I asked my mom about that, and she said, she prays the most when things are the hardest, and that
Yeah.
became really a life lesson for me that came in very, very useful in different parts of my life, and I'll share that a little bit later on. But I grew up in the midst of a large family because my mom is part of a very large family. And so I had a lot of cousins growing up, and we spent a lot of time together. But generally speaking, I was on my own
Yeah.
um,
Which
for
which
most of it.
area in Trinidad? Which area in Trinidad did you live?
Girl, I kind of say all over because I say that I'm an only child, but I have to correct that or else my siblings, I have half siblings, they might get hurt. My dad actually has two older kids. So
Right.
that's the other caveat part of my story. I always tell people I'm an interesting one because I'm a firstborn, I'm a lastborn, I'm an only child, and I'm a middle child.
Mhm.
I'm an anomaly. Um, because my dad had two older kids, and I met them
Right.
later on in life when my dad and I would spend more time with each other. So my dad's family is from northern Trinidad, from
Hmm.
Morva, Laventille area, and my mom's family is from southern Trinidad, and they're from like Siparia, Faizabad area. And
Okay.
my mom lived in Chagones. So I was in the central part of Trinidad in Caroni. My mom actually was a school teacher, and
Oh,
she was, I'd like to say she was quirky. She was quirky and uniquely so. When I was growing up, my mom was like a rock star to me um,
yeah.
because she was that teacher. She would have been, the magic school bus, Miss Frizzle.
Yeah. She
That
taught
was
high
my
school,
mother.
elementary.
She taught elementary.
Okay.
She taught everything from kindergarten up to primary school, the end of primary school when they would graduate and go on to high school.
Mm.
And so my mom was that teacher. She came in singing. She had a song for everything. She would dance with her students.
The
Uh,
fun
very
teacher.
full energy,
Yeah.
very enigmatic kind of personality. Um, and so she was. She was an educator who loved sharing information.
Wow.
That's not very far from me because you get an awful amount of information from me on
I
the
do.
daily.
And in talking about food, because you know I love food, what's your favorite Trini dish?
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I'm a true Trini girl. If I can get my hands on a good doubles,
Oh,
it has to be. I'm sorry, that's my go-to.
yeah.
When I was a little girl and my dad would come to pick me up, and I was picking me up from like even my grandparents' place, especially, there is a town in Trinidad, De Bay. Let me tell
Mhm.
you, when you go down in De Bay and you drive through and you go and you pick up your Pelori, your Sahina, your
Ay,
Kachori,
ay,
good
ay.
doubles, that was it for me, man. That was it. And we had these
Mm.
friends, the Chowties, that used to make the best roti in all down south, man. These rotis were
Wow.
legendary. The
Yeah.
Chowties rotis were
When was the
legendary.
last time you've been home?
Actually, too long. It's been over 30
Okay.
years. Almost
Wow.
30 years. Almost 30 years, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, what age did you leave Trinidad to come to Canada?
So, I did travel back and forth a little bit throughout my childhood, I have to say. And
Right.
that actually disrupted life a little bit. My life has been a
Mhm.
series of disruptions. I actually was thinking about that recently, because my mom's health was not always the greatest. My mom had a
Okay.
serious car accident when I was little. It affected her spine, and because of that, I remember we traveled to Canada when I was little at one point. I think I was maybe about 5 or 6 years old. We traveled to the States, and lived in Long Island for a bit. We traveled back to Trinidad and at different points. And then we finally came back to Canada. For me, it was a bit of a journey. And during that journey, there was a 2 year separation with my mom and I. Um, my mom left Trinidad because at that point, she had traction on her spine and it had temporarily paralyzed her for a couple of months. And
Wow.
the discussion was whether she was going to have surgery. And she knew that the risk of having surgery back home at the time was potentially being paralyzed permanently. So she came back to Canada for treatment, and I stayed home in Trinidad.
Right.
Now, unfortunately, at the same time, one of my aunts had a severe accident in England, and my grandmother had to go to England to help take care of my aunt and her kids. And so my grandfather was an oilman. He had an oil company in Trinidad, and just the responsibility of having to take care of me and my mom being gone. And I stayed with my dad for a little bit of that time. There was a bit of a tragedy there, and then I came back to my grandfather's, and the plan was that I went to the States and I would go
Right.
directly from the States to Canada. Unfortunately, there was a hiccup, and
Right.
I accidentally got stranded in the States for almost a year
Wow. On your own.
on my own with my aunts and relatives. But it was still a very traumatic experience for an 11-year-old, 12-year-old girl
Wow.
who suddenly found herself, separated from her mother, um, still getting over the situation that had happened previous. And yeah, it was a tough time. Um, and that was a very dark season for me. Um,
Yeah.
and we'll get into that.
So, so,
So I
okay.
finally came to Canada in 92. And that's
Okay.
the story.
Yeah, so I know we're gonna touch on a bit of a sensitive topic here, in terms of your sexual abuse. Did that start in Trinidad, or did that start, when you were in the States and stranded? Just share with me a little bit about your experience with the sexual abuse.
Unfortunately for me, it's an ongoing story. So
Okay.
it really started in my childhood, but one of the components that we now realize with being a child with special needs, which we did not know and understand back then, is that
Right.
it set me up for being groomed for a particular type of behavior.
Yeah.
And it made me very susceptible to predatory behavior and also susceptible to a terminology that I didn't really know until recently. I came across it and I was reading a South African article about around sexual child abuse, which was child on child. And so um, there are things that happen, and I know that I'm not the only one that goes through the story because this is a common story for many people, and
Yeah.
it's not just gendered to women or girls, it
Mhm.
also happens to boys as well. Um, and so, these are the things when, and I know this happens when people think, oh, we're just going to let the kids just play downstairs and all the adults congregate upstairs and just let them, oh, they're just being kids or kids are
Yeah.
kids. And I know that we hear about these little terms like, oh, well, they're kissing cousins and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Those can lead to
Oh, baby
very,
house. We when you say, oh, they're playing baby house.
their baby house.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and in St. Vincent, yeah.
And so these little moments actually lead to deeper moments.
Yeah.
Some can go a lot further than you expect and a lot challenges than you expect because sometimes it can lead to social currency, which is like another form of, sad to say, in a way, prostituting yourself for
Mhm.
access to friendship or access to, not being picked on.
Yeah.
I was a kid, was a bit of an odd duck. Still
Do you
am a bit
remember
of an
what,
odd
do you
duck.
remember how old you were?
you know, I was very young. I was about maybe 5 or 6 years old.
Okay.
To my recollection, I think the one that stuck out the most with me, and that brought a lot of contention into my life, was 8. I remember just asking my mom recently, when did this particular incident happen? Because I remembered the scenario around it,
Mhm.
only because I remembered it being a night that there was a sudden blackout. And it turned out that the reason why it was a blackout was one of my uncles had a car accident and hit a lamppost, and it took all the lights out in the neighborhood. We didn't know this at the time.
Right.
I remembered the night. To me, it's so weird because it wasn't the incident that I recalled with clarity. It was what happened afterwards. It was the fact that it was a beautiful night and there were lanterns in everybody's windows, and I was looking at the flickering lights. And so the following day, when my mom came to pick me up, I was so excited to tell my mom how beautiful the night was. Like, did you see last night? They closed the door on my hand to harm me on purpose and warned me that if I spoke about it, I would be, I would basically get in trouble.
So you
And
were
that is the
threatened.
memory that stayed with me.
Yeah, you were threatened.
Yeah, I was threatened.
And
And
was it
so
a family member
that,
or a friend of the home, or like,
it was a family member. And
okay.
so my relationship with this family member was always in contention because it was someone that I loved,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it always had this weird conflict for a very long time. So, and it was hard too because I was also we also didn't know that I was ADHD. I'm not saying that I was a saint of a child. Like I got into a lot of mischief. Like I
Yeah.
remember, oh my gosh, my poor nannies. Like my mom was a single parent and she was a teacher, so she had hired, people to take care of me, and I can remember putting my nannies through it. So when my children put my nannies through it, like my caregivers through it, I was just like, okay, Heavenly Father, this is
Yeah.
what, you know. I recently told my mom that, you know, I watched an Instagram video that triggered a memory for me. And I wrote her and I said, you said to me that one day you'll grow up and have a child just like you. I grew up and had 7 children just like myself.
Wow. Wow.
And in the sense of they are all combinations of having challenges, similar challenges to myself. Like they're either on the autism or the ADHD spectrum. They've
Right.
either, struggled with their mental health in the similar areas. You know, they were just curious kids and
Yeah.
high impulse and high energy. I was a handful. And now, it's hard for people to see that now because they're like, you're so calm, you're so quiet, you're so this. And I'm
Yeah.
like,
But
you
even
do
even
not
being a
know.
even being a handful, it doesn't, excuse, what
Yeah.
someone should do, you know, being sexually abused. And like,
No,
was this continuous over like a year, 2 years, 3 years, or was this like a one time?
no, it was not. And so here's the thing that I recognized because that incident spoke to me that the adults who were around me weren't safe.
Yeah.
My mother, who was my person, I couldn't go to her because that would make her sad. But when a parent shares with you at a very young age some of the struggles that they've had with their own family growing up, you kind of take a protective, caretaker kind of emotional,
Yeah.
mental in your head. So in my head, and also the adults around you are not kind. And they
Mm.
are not aware of the fact that you are listening. But it was weird because I didn't talk about those things. I knew those things were private and not to talk about them because it would cause harm, right? Someone
Right.
already made that very clear to me. But other things I would talk about. So I thought that there was safety amongst kids.
Right.
And so
Right.
I talked to another friend, and then that would open a Pandora's box.
So how did the abuse like shape your life? Like whether if it's negative, positively now, how has that shaped your life today?
I think I've had this conversation with other friends who have gone through similar things because, like I said, the story that I've gone through is not unique to me.
Yeah.
Um, I have found through conversations with other people who have been through similar things that what it does is it kind of because the one thing that I have learned recently is disassociation.
Right.
A coping skill that you develop is disassociating from that kind of situation and scenario. If you talk about something and it opens the door and it puts you in an uncomfortable situation or where it opens the door and that situation happens, you disassociate by going, okay, shit, we're in this right now. Pardon me for saying,
Yeah.
you're in
It's
this right
okay.
now,
Yeah.
right? Okay, what will happen will happen. Let it be.
Mhm.
Just get it over and done with. and move on. And then
Okay.
you cut that situation, that person out, or you just make sure you're not in a situation where you're ever going to be vulnerable to that person again, and you move
Yeah.
on.
Okay.
If
And
you
how has it been that process of healing, that trauma of the sexual abuse?
So interestingly enough, I did not know that that was what was happening until I was an adult. As a little kid, I remember so hard just praying, Lord Jesus, just come into my heart, make me new,
Yeah.
make me new.
Yeah.
Just like praying with all my heart in my life. And just feeling like it was me letting God down all the time. But yet God still reminded me, you and you are not, you are not the, you are not broken. You are not, how do I put this? You are mine. Hold fast to me. Don't let go of my love. And I think my mom saw that I had my struggles because it when I was growing up as a kid, my mom actually was not going to church at the time. Remember, I told you my mother was a singing teacher,
Yeah. Yeah.
a singing teacher. Not that she taught singing; she was just a singing teacher. She just
Yeah.
sang at the time. So that became my thing, and so during the times when things got dark for me, or whenever I just felt that there was something in my spirit that I just was struggling with, I would always turn to singing. I would either, and then when my mom was sick, because remember my mom had her issues going on with her back and her health, I would sing and make up songs to cheer her up and distract her and try to I loved reading and I loved singing. Those were the two things
Yeah.
that were my escapes, singing and music.
This happens quite often with sexual abuse. You know, it takes a while to heal that trauma, and then it stems into your adulthood, even into,
Yeah,
relationships and marriage. So how did
yeah.
this contribute or affect, your marriage? Was the trauma a part of your separation?
So I would say the trauma was a part of my first marriage. Very
Okay,
much so.
okay.
Yeah. So I've been married twice. And
Mhm.
so I would say that went into my first marriage very much so. My second
Okay.
marriage, by the grace of God, I was aware and I was healed.
Okay.
Um, Mostly.
Right. How long was the first marriage? How long was the first marriage and how long was the second marriage?
So the first marriage was 4 years.
Okay.
We got married very young.
Right.
I was 20 when I got married. So I was going through a really bad breakup and I gave up. I literally
Right.
gave up, and that's how that transpired. And I was so heartbroken at that point and I gave up and I was just like, you know what, that's it. This is the life that just seems to be for me. I'm just going to be promiscuous, like God, I give up on God, I give up on you, I
Wow.
give up on myself. And I thought 6 months I thought, okay, I'll just live my life like any other person who just doesn't give a damn. Sorry.
Okay. No, that's
And I was miserable. I told people it's the only 6 months of my life that I was not a believer, that I was not a Christian, because I was like, God, you
yeah.
go your way and I'll go mine. And so I decided to return to church, and I'm not saying that church is easy, because let me tell you, we can be very judgmental.
Yeah,
I've
it's
been
true.
there.
It's true. Especially growing up in the Caribbean, right? Caribbean and the churches, you know, the
Experienced
judgments and
judgment.
everything. And it's okay to, when you especially when you're going through a hard time, to feel like
Mhm.
God is not there. You can feel that, but it's like you always get back on track.
On track. And especially when you had your friends around you, especially when they knew how much you love the Lord, going, so you're
Yeah.
backsliding. like, what are you talking about? I was like, and that was the hardest because even when you weren't backsliding, you are like battling it out with God, and they're like, "You're backsliding."
Yeah. Yeah.
So just because I missed a couple of Sundays does not mean that God and I are on the down, like on the.
Exactly. Exactly.
This is where the healing came in. So
Yeah.
I did get into that relationship, and what I didn't know is that my first husband, um, unfortunately, I married someone who was very much like my past.
That happens. Trauma does that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I found that out in the middle of my marriage.
Mm-hmm.
We were sharing our stories that we had both come from a similar background. We both
Mm-hmm.
been through trauma. But unfortunately, what he had shared was really devastating to me. And I went through a bit of cognitive dissonance where part of me just became detached. And it was very, very difficult to reconcile what I had learned because it was very traumatic for me.
Yeah.
It became a problem because towards the end of our marriage, it really was part of it, added to what broke my spirit. It
Right.
broke it really added to what broke my spirit for my marriage. And so then that divorce was very, very painful in a lot of ways. My ex-partner, and this is a significant part. So by the end of that marriage, I was extremely suicidal. I had been struggling with suicidal ideation from the time I was 9 years old. Because by the time I was nine, the abuse continually finding me, or what felt like it was continually finding me, but I didn't realize the Pandora effect had been happening because I opened the door to sharing what was going on in my life. It kept opening the door to darkness and other people attracting that into my
Yeah.
life. And so one what had happened was I started to listen to the voices in my head that said, this would be so much easier if you just give it up, just
Wow.
give up life. What kept me was my mom, because I knew that at that time I was all that she had. My mom was a single mom. And remember, in my head, I knew that I felt like I was still her protector at that time. And so that's just me as a child, right? Because of what she had gone through with my dad, and she came out of an abusive marriage and an abusive family. And so, you share all of these things. It's like secondhand trauma is a thing. So I had been carrying secondhand trauma. I've been carrying not only my own trauma, but I was also carrying someone else's trauma as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then added to that, my mom's hate for my dad was so strong. And I think this is also something I need to touch on. My mom's hate towards my dad was also so strong. And because, remember, I didn't recognize the Pandora effect, and I kept feeling like I was attracting all of this badness towards me, and that I was such a horrible kid, even though I was fighting to not be a horrible kid because I didn't want that
Yeah.
stigma. That then I must be like my dad. And then if I was like my dad, then that means my mom could hate me.
So the
That was
suicide,
happening.
the suicide, was that just an idea, or did you tried, like, did it turn into an action where you actually tried to hurt
It
yourself?
was an action. It was an action. So I was
Wow.
actually in living with my relatives in Long Island, New York,
Mm-hmm.
and I was in their backyard. And I remember sneaking into the bathroom, getting a bottle of pine salt from underneath the bathroom sink, sneaking it outside, and actually trying to drink it. Yeah.
But the
And
thought of your mom basically is what saved you, wanting to be there for her.
then I tried throwing it up, being panicked, running into the. And I remember my auntie, I think she was icing a cake or something at the time. And she was like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Nothing, nothing." And I was praying that they didn't smell the pine sol on me. I left the pine sol outside and I just like started drinking. She's like, "What are you doing with all that milk?" And and I was just like, "Oh, nothing." And I'm like, pouring lots of sugar. She's like, "Girl, what are you doing with all that sugar?" I'm like, "Just making some sweet milk." And I'm like stirring it and I'm trying to like hustle back out into the backyard and just drinking it and crying and like drinking it and then going into the bathroom and brushing my teeth and washing my face and trying not to like be so stout. But and the weird thing was that no one caught me crying.
Right?
I didn't get into trouble. I was also afraid I was going to get into trouble because of the milk, but no one picked up on it.
Right.
And then I was just able to just assimilate myself back into like it was a normal day.
Yeah. Okay.
And I
So,
never talked to anyone that day about what had happened.
okay.
But I will
Wow.
say that there were many other times where I remember when I moved to here to Canada and I was living with my mom and my stepdad. One day I held pills in my hand, like a whole bunch of pills. It was just crazy. Like, yeah, I wasn't a cutter or anything like that, but the
Yeah.
thought, and yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So let's just step back a little bit. Let's go back to your marriage for a little bit. With your second marriage,
hmm
what caused the separation?
Loss. That was a really tough year. In 2002. So in January of 2002, I just found out that I was pregnant with our third child. And I, in February, started spotting. And the Sunday before it was my mother-in-law's birthday, I wasn't feeling well enough to go over to her house. So he had gone over and I recognized that I was spotting and so he had to come home. My girlfriends were coming over because that was used to be their thing. Everybody would come over to my house and hang out and they were coming over anyways. And he was on a call because he was thinking of switching jobs.
Okay.
So he was on a call with this company from the States, and we had made the decision that I was going to go to the hospital to get checked out.
Mhm.
And still on the call, never even paused the call, but still on the call, he looks at me and he says, "Do you need me to go with you? Or do you want to go with your girls?" And I said, "I guess I can go with the girls." And it wasn't until after I went to the hospital that I realized what just happened there. I am miscarrying potentially our child, and you ask me whether or not I need you to go with me to the hospital.
You felt like he wasn't emotionally there for you during such a tough time.
You came home because I told you I'm spotting potentially. You went on a business call. And that business call was still so much more important that you're still on the phone while we're discussing going to the. At this point, you should have been hanging up
Yeah.
and be present.
Yeah. So was it a combination of, I would say, grief and resentment?
Definitely. It was just realizing that I was married to someone who had such little regard for who I was as a person.
Yeah.
And it was so blatant. And it was just, I just couldn't process it all. So, one of the other things that had happened during the pregnancy, during that loss, was my girlfriend came over with her newborn to help and to stay with me.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry to talk about this if it's a trigger for someone, but I opted to have a natural miscarriage.
Hmm.
It was my first miscarriage. I didn't know any better. And I ended up accidentally seeing the tissue of the baby. And I was very much traumatized because I didn't know what to do. Like, I didn't know what to do. I literally stood there in shock. So, my girlfriend took care of it for me, and I didn't know what she did, where it went, what
Right.
happened. The reason why I brought that up is because it ended up being part of what ended up causing me to break down again and have a complete mental breakdown a couple of months later because um,
Take your time.
when a couple of days after that happened, he had to go away on a 10-day business trip
Right.
for this company. And I said, okay, you can go. I'll be fine. And it seemed that anytime I said, okay, I'm fine, he was okay with that. And he was good to go. So he went away for 10
You
days.
weren't fine.
No, I
You
was
weren't
not,
fine. Why couldn't you just tell him, you weren't fine,
because
that you needed him?
because I knew that he couldn't be there for me.
Okay.
In my head, he already let me down.
Mm,
He was not a safe space for me.
okay.
So if he was not a safe space for me and could not recognize to be a safe space for me, I was alone.
Yeah.
You can't force someone to recognize. We were losing our child. He was on a business call.
Yeah.
The day we had to go to confirm whether or not we lost our child, I had to almost demand, request that he had to be there. And even through that whole process, his mind was not with me, concerned about me. He was
Hmm.
concerned about everything else.
Yeah. So you felt like he wasn't there when you needed him the most.
No.
Yeah.
And as much as this was an essential business trip, I and I didn't, and for that same reason, I never shared with him that I ended up witnessing the remains of our child and at one point, he even called me a liar about it.
Wow.
And I was like, you know what? I can't make that up. You know, my friend witnessed it. My friend physically had to take care of it because I went through that traumatic experience. I will not lie about something like that. So, this was not someone who was for me. And that was the moment in my head that I knew that this was not someone who was ever for me. And then, if that was not someone who was for me, what was my purpose in being in that relationship?
Right.
And so
Mm.
I was just so numb. I was so numb. And the issues around that later, that so then the insanity that happened afterwards is just, I there are no words. So he comes back from his trip, and I used to perform with a gospel group in Ottawa, and I had stepped down because of the miscarriage, and I stepped back from my duties at my home church. And he had people in our family circles, in our church circles, call me selfish because I stepped back from ministry,
Wow.
stepped back from our church choir, I stepped back from leading VBS that summer, and I was called selfish because people did not understand the depths of the grieving that I was going through,
Yeah.
or how hard my depression had hit, or I was desperately just trying to breathe.
And
Every day I was waking up just trying to breathe.
at this point, were you already diagnosed with autism? Was that something you had? Okay. What age did you officially got diagnosed with
Only
autism?
in 2021. So I was still living,
Wow, that's very recent.
yeah, I was still living lost, not
Yeah.
understanding why I was processing life the way I was. So, without
So
getting into the rest of that, all of
that
that went
played a
after.
huge role in it as well.
Exactly. So I was just very lost. So the long and the short of that season was it ended badly. I Things crashed, long and the short of that season. And the reason why I bring that up is because by October of that year, he had convinced our church community, our family community, and the local police that I had assaulted him. He had me criminally charged.
He
Yes.
had you criminally charged and he kidnapped
Our two children.
what?
Yeah.
And this is
Master.
the second marriage.
This is
When
my
did
first
this
marriage.
happen?
My first
The
marriage.
first marriage. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So 21 years ago, by the end of that year, I had lost a baby. My marriage came apart in the worst, most public way ever. My two children were now taken from me, and I had supervised access to my kids, where I saw them twice a week for 3-hour visits and had to fight for full custody of my kids.
What was the criminal charge? What was that for?
Yeah, he tried to claim that I assaulted him.
Okay. Okay. That's okay.
Yeah, and I didn't. Yeah,
Wow.
because I left him, and yeah, it was a trip. It was a whole
Wow.
experience.
So in terms of, the autism, how many kids do you have with your first husband?
Two. And our
Two.
oldest
Eh,
is autistic, and
Okay.
our second oldest is she is also on the spectrum as well. Yeah.
Okay. So just two kids
Yeah.
are artistic,
Hmm.
basically. Okay.
Yeah.
So how did the autism, how did that like shape your life, in terms of your growth and your perspective on life now?
So I think how that changed everything for me, now that I look back at life, is that it definitely made me more vulnerable to recognizing dangers. and recognizing the potential, you know, intentions of people in our lives. I think being groomed at a very young age to accept situations that should not be acceptable
Yeah.
definitely made it challenging. I think that, but on the same hand, being autistic, the strength of being able to dissociate from the bad situations and being able to just make a decision to choose to move always towards a better outcome has
Yeah.
also been a strength,
Yeah.
because given all that I've been through in my life, I just keep persevering. I keep moving towards the best outcome possible. I
Yeah.
Unfortunately, when you're late diagnosed, you are not aware of how the other factors. I think I wish I knew earlier, because it would help me to take ownership for my mental health, my healing journey, my where I'm at now. In 2017, I started venturing through the collective trauma that I went through. Started connecting to the emotional depth of what these things are in my life.
Right.
I had a concussion in 2018, and yes, I am currently separated right now. I have to say that I am grateful. Um,
Your second marriage, right?
yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
I am grateful that my current partner, who we are currently separated, um, but I am grateful that he was there that night that I fell. So he heard me fall, rushed into the bathroom, and found me on the floor, you know, semi unconscious.
Wow.
What
Wow.
we thought was just, initially when they triaged me at the hospital, they were just like, okay, you've got a bump on the head, you'll be fine. No, 2.5 years of my life. It was not just a bump on the head. A couple of days in, my brain felt like it was just on fire. It was the worst experience of my life. Um, I don't think I ever screamed or cried or felt anything so searingly painful in my life, because the entire back portion of my brain basically registered the trauma, and my eyes, my ears, my just everything in my brain was just inflamed in pain.
Wow.
And that was it. I couldn't even handle
Yeah.
light or sound. I tell
Yeah.
people often that even the sound of my blood rushing in my ears was painful. So my babies, the youngest of my 7 kids with my current partner, they were only 2 and 4 years old. And so all of a sudden, my kids lost a parent.
Yeah. So, with all those challenges and with everything that you've been through and still going through, I know one of the things that's really saved you is music. You're classically trained. You sing opera as well,
I
right?
do. Yes, I do.
Yes, perfect. And I know that you perform now. And apart from music, Yulin, what other, activities, practices, or strategies that has helped you overcome or allowing you to overcome all your challenges now?
Really, it comes down to just the joy of music and right now, when it comes to classical music, I can't explain what drew me to classical so
I
much.
can see the joy on your face right now. You're like lighting up just talking about music. I can see you beaming.
Music makes me happy. Music
Yeah,
is my first love. It really is. I remember standing in my grandparents' backyard and just singing to the stars and singing to the trees and singing to the sun and just singing. Or
yeah,
you'd find me in a good window somewhere just singing
yeah,
for the joy of it because it just soothed me. It just helped me to take myself out of those places. It was
yeah,
calming, it was healing to be able to um, step into a story and tell a story.
yeah,
I loved stories. So stories to song, I guess, really it's what really in kind of intrigued me.
what
And
about like people, around you, friends? How has that support been? Or did you even get a lot of support, going through what you go through?
oh, definitely. I am really tremendously thankful and tremendously blessed by some of the incredible musicians and friends in my life. I have beautiful friends who are so encouraging and supportive. Um, just even helping out with, recently I've had performances, whether it's the competitions or just trying out being in a musical for the first time. Um, that's been really great. My ex partner, before we separated, and even recently, has helped out with our youngest boys, and so I'm I'm thankful for that. Even though we've had our challenges, I know I haven't really spoken very much about him in context to our whole life. We can circle back to that, but I do have to say thank you for that part that he and I have managed to work out enough stuff over the last 6 months
And
that
that's your second husband, right?
yeah, that's my second
Yeah.
husband.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, and it's not that it's not still complicated, it's complicated.
Mhm.
But I appreciate that we're able to just put ourselves aside, focus on our boys
And
because
and that's
Mhm.
mhm. I was
You're
gonna
about to
say like that's like so important, even though it didn't work with, your second husband, how appreciative and thankful you are to him, even in this aspect, going through the separation that you're going through, like that's like really amazing.
It comes for myself from
Mhm.
my own personal experience being a child of divorce
Yeah,
and what I want for my boys. It is, like I'm not saying that it absolves everything and it changes everything that has happened between us, but as parents, for them, they're autistic. They need to have the best parts of us where we're able to put aside to a certain degree our own issues,
yeah,
focus on them because they deserve a better part of us. So if we can
yeah.
do some sort of okay, truce on this issue when it comes to the boys, they see us being respectful towards each other. They see us trying to be polite. They don't need to get caught up in any more stuff that does not belong to them.
Commendable, very commendable. It's like you guys are adding that level of selflessness, to give your kids the best, and that's very commendable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the fact that he's willing to meet me at that, you know, because we still don't agree. We still don't
Yeah.
agree on my perspective, his perspective. Let's just agree to disagree. Okay. That's
That's
fine, you
okay,
know?
but you work together. You
But
work
we work
together.
together for the sake of our kids. And
Correct.
the other thing too is that he has two older kids that are from his first relationship before we got married.
Right.
My I call them my blessing kids because they are my kids too,
In fact.
right? And so we were able to make those little pockets of moments where we got together and we did some things with both of the kids so that they had that experience. And then I had them into my home where I could connect with them and have
Yeah.
that time with them, with my kids and also their siblings, because I genuinely love these kids. These are kids that I've prayed for and longed for 10 years. That doesn't just stop because our relationship ended, you know?
True.
And there's such a huge difference still between the two different marriages because I don't have that kind of relationship
With
still
your
with my first
previous. Yeah.
husband.
Yeah.
No.
So how how did, these experiences that you've been through influence your advocacy for mental health, being sexually abused and, autism and suicidal awareness? You know, how has that influenced your advocacy on those things?
Well, I definitely, knowing what I know now, definitely want to be a voice for children's mental health.
Right.
I have walked it personally. I have walked it as a parent. I have walked through these things in community. And I used to be a developmental support worker, and I have seen the other end of it as well. So when I was a single parent, I had to support my family.
Yeah.
And I worked 15 years for a care agency where I had to read the history of how the individuals came into care and recognizing the patterns and the stories and seeing the similarities. I think the reason why I cared for and made the connections in caring for the individuals that I supported is because I could resonate with their stories. I
Yeah,
could
you connected.
I
Yeah,
connect.
you connected. Yeah.
And so in the back of my head, I can always say, this would be the kind of support, if I was in their shoes, this would be the kind of support that I wanted. And that always made
Okay.
it really important to me. Why was this important to do this, this, and this? Because if I was the other person on that side, this is the kind of support that I would want.
Yeah, so full circle. It
It was
really
full
comes full
circle
circle, you're giving back. Yeah. And so, you know,
because I
obviously,
recognized the trauma. And so I
yeah.
was doing that intuitively, not knowing that I was
Mhm.
exactly like the people I was supporting. In fact, when I got my diagnosis in 2021, I was like, oh, I'm autistic. And I was like, you get a diagnosis, and you get a diagnosis, and you
But it
get a
rang
diagnosis.
off an alarm bell because it started to explain a lot
A
of what
lot.
happened in your life and what was going on. Yeah.
And I was like sending it out like validation. I sent it to my parents. I sent it to friends. I sent it to
Yeah.
old friends
Yeah.
because I was just like, dudes, like, come on, give a woman some grace. Like,
Yeah.
finally, I deserve some grace. Having autism, I realized, like, people say there was a method to your madness. And I realized that everything that I used to do for my oldest son, who's autistic, and for my other kids, like putting up these different charts and writing certain things and putting them around,
Right.
they were systems that also served me because I am a person with autism who also needed support.
Yeah.
I know that I joke about the fact that I'm a hot mess doing her best, but it also means that
We
I
all are a hot
tried,
mess doing our best, Ulyn.
right, right. But it's like I struggled with and then also too recently I had a conversation and I said to remember I told you I left my home country so many times. So with that, I just want to point out that education wise, I always feel so less than
Yeah.
because I didn't do things the traditional way and I didn't feel sufficient, even as a musician, sufficient because I always felt less than. But then I remember, but God.
Yeah.
I was 16 years old when I started studying music. I was 17, 1 month away from being 18 years old when all of a sudden, because I accidentally got an audition, got into opera lira, ended up at the NAC performing on the main stage beside Maria Pellegrini. What? I had only been studying music less than 2 years, but by the grace of God. I came to Canada in 1992, and you're telling me less than 6 years later, I had only seen two shows at the NAC. I had no clue what the NAC was. I didn't even know. I got a CD, not a CD, correctly, a cassette for my 16th birthday for the love of Ella. I had no idea who Ella Fitzgerald was because I'd only really just found out about jazz a couple of weeks before, but I fell in love with it.
Yeah.
And the reason why I fell in love with it is because in Trinidad and Tobago, I grew up on musicals, right?
Yeah.
We West Indians love our musicals, okay? And Sound
Caribbean
of
people,
Music,
we love music. We
right?
turn everything into music.
Thank
Okay.
you.
I remember even, part of my mechanism for studying back, in elementary and high school, I would turn my notes into music. I turn it into song. And that helped me to remember my work. So
That is how my mother taught kids back in Trinidad. Do you see what I'm saying? Miss Frizzle, right? She was the OG. So I am like listening to this song and I pause the tape and I come downstairs and I said, Mom, that woman is singing your song. She was singing, Summertime and the living is easy.
wow.
Fish are jumping and the cotton is high. My mom used to sing that to me as a lullaby every night. So I didn't even know it was
Amazing.
Gershwin. I didn't
Yeah.
know Ella made it famous. I knew nothing. Porgy and Bess, nothing.
So so with that, so with that, what, encouragement or word of advice would
Mhm.
you offer to, the viewers and anybody who's watching out there who's gone through similar experiences at you? What would you tell them?
I would say own your story. Own your story because it does not define who you can be. I know that, yes, I have like a crazy story, but there is someone out there who has a crazier story than me. But
That's
here's the beauty about it, we made it.
true. It's true. It's
If
true.
you made it to today, celebrate. Celebrate good times. Come on. I know that not every circumstance is honky dory. I
Yeah.
understand. Okay. I am a realist as much as I'm an optimist.
That's
Okay.
just life. That's just
That
life.
is life.
Yeah.
But the fact that we made it through these things, the fact that we overcame and we made it to today, that is means something. That's significant. When my life fell apart in 2002, in the worst way possible, then, and I've been through some harder things since,
Yeah.
I wanted to give up on life. But in my spirit, God said to me, live for me. And I've never had an ideation since 2002. October 15, 2002 was the last day that I struggled with my mental health on the aspect of death and suicidal ideation. Honestly, to God, I can tell you. And every single day since, I have been through some things, but you know what? This life is worth it.
Yeah.
I have met some of the most beautiful people in my life that I would not have met had I not been here. If I had
Yeah.
left my children, so many of my children, and I've been through some journeys, that's a whole other story, and we don't got time. Um, but I thank God for them. And I have my struggles with them, you know, and as much as it hurts, I will never, ever stop loving because something hurts.
Yeah. And part of, going through these things too, especially, coming through it, the growth and development is also to, have the courage to share your story to inspire somebody else, to motivate somebody else. Because a lot of times, even though we know, you know, there's other people going through things, within that moment of your struggle, you do feel alone. You really do feel alone. So, I really admire your courage today for stepping out, to make others aware. And that's also part of healing, right? Talking about it is part of healing as well. And being able to, really encourage someone. But Yulin, before we go, I have one thing for you to do, okay? So we all know we're from the Caribbean, you're from Trinidad, I'm from St. Vincent. We gotta give people a little bit of our dialect here. So I want you to say something in your Trinidadian dialect and then just translate it to, proper English just for, viewers who may not know. So say something to me in your Trinidadian dialect, and then I want you to translate it for me. Come on now.
Oh gosh, yeah. So my friend Shamika, she just tell me all the time, "Oh gosh, mommy, when you're trying to like come out, it's like a moko jambi just bite you."
You see, I understand. So translate that into proper English, just for some of our viewers who's not going to understand the Patois dialect. Tell me what you just said.
My friend will say to me, she says, when, oh gosh, so, oh goodness, or oh my gosh, oh
Yeah,
my,
yeah,
when your dialect comes out, it is like a moko jambi, or, like a spirit, a sprite,
right, right.
will jump out and bite you. Or,
Oh my goodness. Oh, Yulin, it has been an absolute pleasure. You are a beautiful, strong, amazing woman, mom, and singer. I really appreciate you sharing everything that you had to today. And we're going to do a panel. So I am going to definitely get you back on that panel when it's time to do the panel. You are amazing.
and just encourage everyone, keep moving forward.
Yeah,
Keep moving forward. You will find the people that you're meant to connect with and encourage you along your way. And don't give up. There's always.
perfect. Awesome. Thank you, Yulin. And we will see you again.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.